Starliner Media. Starliner Media presents Music Night at the Majestic with your host, Michael Boswell.
All right, it's time once again for Music Night at the Majestic, and with us tonight, Tony Tyrrell. Tony, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Michael. Delighted to be here.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, you've got the new album that comes out tomorrow, Conviction. And we'll get into that, but obviously, well, this is your first solo record, but it's your fourth record overall?
Yeah, my fourth overall. So I've kind of a varied musical background, and this is a kind of a jumping off the pier a bit, in terms of put myself front and center, but exciting times. It's kind of an interesting project, kind of came on me over COVID, over that period of time that we had to kind of lock ourselves in and think a bit, and had a bit of time to kind of, just play around a bit with some tunes, and decided, look, it was time to do this. I've been writing a long time in different contexts. So this was a new departure to put myself in the middle of it. And I'm excited about it and hope other people will be too.
Well, I'll tell you, upon initial listen, my first thought was, it sounds like you have written the soundtrack for a little independent film. Because you've got that, it's kind of got that vibe to it. Lyrically, you approach it more from like a literary style, if you will, very observational. You give a lot of detail, so you've got that, which there's the songs tell stories themselves, but then the production value on it's got that very atmospheric thing going. So as I'm listening to it, it's like, man, this is a soundtrack for a film that hasn't been made yet.
Hopefully somebody decides to make it. That would be nice. But that's an interesting observation. I think when I went into it, the discussions I had with the producer, a guy called Tommy McLaughlin, works out of a studio in Donegal here in the northwest of Ireland. Very accomplished and acclaimed here. But the conversations I had with him is, I didn't kind of use the word retro or that type of language, but we kind of came to an agreement that we didn't want, for want of a better word, a fancy record. We wanted to kind of do a real record in the sense of music I would have listened to, growing up, the music I still listen to, and that I enjoy, where, people just do their thing and it doesn't become multi-layered and so on. And then bring into that, if you like, the sort of, the style that I have when I write songs, you say, is kind of somewhat level of detail and observation. Sometimes I think there are straight line stories, but most of the time not. And that part of it probably comes from my training. I originally studied English literature, and I really don't believe in hitting people over the head. I kind of like the idea, which is how I receive music, of making of it whatever it is that I think it should be. Whether they're musical stories or narrative stories or whatever, leaving room for that interpretation. I'm very clear in my own head about what it's about most of the time, at least. But it doesn't necessarily have to be my song when you hear it. It becomes your song. And I think that's, I think a lot of people consume music that way. Although there is a trend, I think, the other way, where it becomes a bit beating you over the head, and it becomes, relatively, what would you call it? A mono narrative, which is really not something that I'm attracted to at all.
Well, and there's a lot of bombast, I guess would be the word, for a lot of things in our world today.
Yeah. So, a lot of it. Yeah. and it's filtered into music too, which is kind of, I suppose the thing is, it's just so much there, and I would hope that people don't listen to just one thing, and there is a tendency, I think, even outside of music, I think, in our world, for people to categorize things, and everything has to be in a box, and you're either this or you're that. Personally speaking, I think that, that kind of defeats the whole concept of choice and freedom, you know, that you know, you can be anything you want to be at any given point in time, and certainly your imagination can be anywhere it wants to be, and that's kind of the way I approach both listening to music and, you know, largely speaking in songwriting as well, you know, just to give that little bit of scope. I'm very, very interested in language, you know, and I always have been, but I'm also very, very interested in music, and I always have been. So, you know, having the opportunity to play around with both is just great fun, you know, for me. And I think, you know, also in terms of approaching this project and producing the album, I was kind of very determined that I'd kind of enjoy myself, you know, and kind of come out of it saying, yeah, you know, I'm kind of happy with this, and whatever happens, happens. You know, there's no, you know, I'm not taking on the world here, or, you know, I'm not expecting anything extraordinary. I just wanted to do what I thought was a good album, present that to people, and see what they think, you know. But so that's the kind of, yeah, where I'm coming from, broadly speaking.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, Tony, you mentioned your music of your youth. What were the songs that, or artists that you gravitated to when you were young?
There's a big mixture, you know, that, you know, in the sort of, I think I'd said this to somebody else, that I have a couple of uncles who are not that much younger than me on both sides of my family. So my dad's youngest brother, my mother's youngest brother. And so when I was, you know, 10, whatever, you know, age I was, they were listening to, you know, the Rolling Stones and the Beatles, Van Morrison and Cream and all this sort of stuff. And they would have fed me this. They had very different tastes. They were coming from sort of those different lines, you know, and but they fed me that music, which kind of really had a profound effect, you know, because it was, and it still is, so excellent, you know, innovative, you know, kind of progressive, searching out, you know, new ways to sound and present and so on. So that was kind of that part of it. And then the other part was that, you know, in Ireland, there were kind of bands emerging like Thin Lizzy and like a band called Horselips, which I'm not sure you guys would have heard of, a Celtic rock band, which would have been, you know, pretty huge here, bringing in the sort of traditional side and so on, you know, mixing it all up. And, you know, they were just fantastic. But at a certain point in time, I fell in love with Bob Dylan, and I've never fallen out of love with Bob Dylan, no matter what he's done since. And that brought me then into the whole other element, into a folk world, and then into the sort of broader folk rock thing, Lappy Neil Young or Leonard Cohen and all of the usual, you know, the people that one would say. But I think that a lot of the music I listen to, in my head at least, it sounds like music that has to be, you know, a recent example of that would have been, for example, Radiohead or Arcade Fire, you know, as bands that they sound to me like bands that just have to be. They don't sound manufactured in any way, or, you know, it's this kind of drive that's in them that comes out in this form of expression that's absolutely wonderful. And so there's that. But on the other side, Michael, you know, I trained as a classic, you know, I trained in clarinet classically. And through that would have played a lot of classical music in concert bands and orchestras. And I absolutely love classical music, and have and continue to listen to it, as well as then anything from big band jazz into jazz proper, you know, anything from Chet Baker to, you know, Miles Davis or whatever. So, you know, I listen to all of that and love all of that. From a songwriting point of view, I think maybe the earlier stuff is more influential, but then also, I suppose, you know, contemporary people like, for example, Ron Sexsmith, who I, you know, again, absolutely love. Richard Thompson, you know, who I would have listened to back in the days of, you know, while he was in the band and moving on then as a solo artist, and, you know, people like Josh Ritter and, you know, these sort of guys. So that's the kind of mix that's certainly I've listened to. I'm not sure that that's exactly what comes out in the music, but it's certainly in my head in terms of range.
Yeah. Tell me this. who would be a few of your favorite classical composers?
Classical, well, there was a time when every single night, without fail, and this would be, as often as I could, I would listen to the Ninth Symphony. I just think it's like the pinnacle of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. I think it's like, the absolute pinnacle of, human endeavor. The wonderful thing about all music is that before it's there is nothing. And that's the thing that always astounds me, that this is nothing from nothing, and it becomes this thing. And whatever about the great songs and so on we listen to, when you get up to the level of that, something like the Ninth Symphony, or the music of Debussy, for example, and again, where that takes you in almost a dreamlike sort of a state all of the time. That sort of stuff is just sublime. I think, to use that word sublime or awesome, as opposed to just really good. So they're the sorts of things that I would also be heavily attracted to.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned jazz. Who would be a few of the artists that had a big, where you heard them for the first time and you said, wow, and they've stuck with you?
The one in particular is John Coltrane, and again, I think, while I listen to a range of jazz, and it wouldn't necessarily be my primary genre. Some of it I find quite challenging. I get lost and I don't quite know what's happening. But just I played saxophone, so when I heard John Coltrane, it's literally the sound. It's this guttural. It's just, I know people use the word soul and all that sort of stuff, but it's literally him coming out of this instrument, and it's almost like it's not air that's making that sound that he makes. Just that absolute individuality of that sound, unmistakable, and the technical proficiency that went with that sometimes I think he may have overplayed, and then other times just got absolutely right. So that I think that it would, his music is something that kind of has spoken to me, really, really strongly. Sometimes I wouldn't, when I say understand, you know what I mean? I wouldn't quite know what he's even doing, but it's almost like, I'm not a religious person, but it's almost gets to that level of prayer, I think, the way he vocalizes his music through the instrument.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned, starting with clarinet, moving into saxophone.
Yeah.
Do you think that the instrument that an artist starts with affects their take on their music later, where I say, a clarinet player would bring a different perspective than a guitar player or a pianist or what have you?
Yeah, I think so. I think for me the biggest difference is phrasing. How you hear musical phrases when you're playing a wind instrument. You make that phrase with your breath. You support that phrase with your breath. Whether you're reading music or where you're playing ad lib, that discipline is a very, very particular thing. You make the sound of the instrument, going back to the Coltrane thing. But every clarinet player will sound different. Benny Goodman to Artie Shaw, they're very different. So Acker Bilk or whatever, they just sound completely different, and them straight away. So there's the sound, that projected sound, but there's also the sense of the shaping of a phrase that I think put me in good stead when I decided I wanted to sing. That it kind of was already there. That notion of supporting from your diaphragm, that technical thing that wind players do, and that aspect of it was there and allowed me, I think, to kind of shift into singing without too great a difficulty. And the other thing actually is kind of, this may sound weird, but a wind instrument is up and down. You kind of, I see music like that, whereas a guitar is a cross, and I must say I find the guitar very difficult. So I play the guitar, but I play the guitar to write songs. I wouldn't be the most proficient guitarist in the world. I absolutely love the instrument. But I find in a way, it's like when I sit down with the guitar to practice it, I hear something and I go off and start writing a song rather than practice, whereas I used to know what practice was playing the instruments. And I think that they give a certain sense. And I think I go back to that phrase, shaping a phrase, if you like, phrasing, that they add to your sense of how you deliver a line and how you write a line. And then ultimately for me personally, making that kind of shift into actually becoming a singer.
Yeah. With all the different artists and styles that we've talked about, were you a big record collector to where you would go out and you'd hear something, get it, and then build a collection with?
Yeah, I'd be kind of like, I do that. I actually recently just got a new turntable. I haven't had one for a long time. And I got it as a gift from my family. And with the, what do they call them? The remote speakers, Bluetooth speakers. So it's fantastic because we've kind of taken out the records and kind of dusting them off. And, I just the other night I was playing Infidels by Dylan. With people over, I was playing that there. And actually the first record I put on it was the first Dylan record I listened to, which was The Times Are Changing. And I have to admit that I kind of shed a tear, because it's a whole different experience. And, the crackle even reminded me of the hours and hours and hours that I would listen to these songs. That I would spend listening to music in general as a thing I was doing, not in passing, because while I was doing something else, while I was just listening to music. And life gets more complicated, and the amount of time I have to just listen to music is reduced. So I was maybe crying for my youth, but I had a decent enough collection. Again, Van Morrison and Dylan. There's some Eric Clapton in there. There's all sorts of stuff in it. But I then kind of switched to CDs and lost the vinyl aspect of it. Loads of tapes and everything. The people used to make the mixtapes, which is great.
Right.
And I remember when I met my now wife first, she didn't really know much about Bob Dylan, and I made her a mixtape called "You Can't Beat Your Bit of Bob," and I actually found it recently in a box somewhere, So, but and that would be played in the car or all that sort of stuff. But then I started into the CDs, and the first CD I bought, I got what do they call it, a Discman, and I was actually going to Scotland for a Hogmanay party, and the first CD I bought was Dark Side of the Moon, which I had on vinyl, but I just thought the whole CD thing and this how we were sold how wonderful it is that I had to listen to this album on CD first, and now we're going back again, so into the album. But I imagine you're the same, and a lot of musicians are the same. Well, a lot of people who just like music are the same. One of the best things in the world was just go into a record shop and just leaf, and say you recognize them. The minute you see things, you just recognize, and just it was like this sort of like little shot of pleasure, because you know what's on that disc, and you go, yeah, and I have that, and then oh, here's one I don't have, or even if you do have it, buy it again.
Yeah. Tell me this, Tony. You mentioned making mixtapes. Have you gone back and recreated those tapes, now with MP3 files, playlists on your phone or whatever device you're using?
I haven't done that actually. It's interesting because I tend to kind of, I'm a little bit, that whole the whole online music thing, it just is a bit overwhelming for me. I use it, but I just much rather putting on a CD or now back to the vinyl. I did recently, really good fun making. I had a birthday recently, and for the party we made a sort of a dance mix. And that was everything from, I Love to Love, that song, and Oops Upside Your Head, and all these sort of, and, they were all kind of contemporary, if you like, at the time. and we really good fun making it, and it went down very well at the party. But that was a whole other thing, you know. But I don't, I do. There are friends of mine who do that, and they make them, and some of them actually make them and then they burn it onto a CD still, and they'll give it, like, I got a couple of gifts from people actually for my birthday of various things. And it's a really nice thing to do, because I think somebody's thinking of you when they're doing it. So that's I think the nice part, and they're spending time doing it, and time being so precious is probably the best of gifts. Huh?
Oh, absolutely. And those, recreating those old playlists, every mixtape that you made is like an album for an artist, where it's a snapshot of where that person is at that moment.
Yeah.
So when you hear those old mixtapes, whether it takes you back to the late 70s, early 80s, whatever, it's an immediate transference back to that time.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had, there was another one I remember. We had, myself and my wife, we were driving around France, and we had one with a whole range of different things, like Talking Heads and the Eurythmics and Tracy Chapman, and a whole bunch of different things on it. And I still, the wonderful thing I think about both a mixtape and an album is you have a, it's that kind of pleasure principle of what's coming next, and you're looking forward to it. Whereas I think the sort of jumping around stuff now is kind of like, well, it's great, you can be surprised, but at the same time, it's just a little bit, it's a different experience. I think, I don't mean to sound old fashioned, but it's a different experience in terms of your anticipation of, listen to something like, the White Album, for example, and just to hear, the airplane going into While My Guitar Gently Weeps is, that's just extraordinary. And it's that type of thing that I think maybe I miss in having a more ordered approach to music. Huh?
Well, I'll tell you what, one of the things that I will do with creating playlists now is I will put together, say, a 2-hour block, and I will try to include as many genres as possible, but make sure that the segues, one song flows to the next. It's a natural progression. And, you'll start out, at A, and by the time you get to F or G, you realize, wait a minute, this is, I am nowhere near where I started, but it all flows.
Yeah. You're like a paramilitary type of DJ, leading people through.
Exactly. Now tell me this, do you remember the first album that you bought?
Wow. First album that I bought. I can't remember the first one that my dad had a friend who got records. He was involved in some way with not in the music industry, but in records, for stores and so on. And so he used to come home and give me things, and Noel, his friend, would also kind of just send things to me. So I'd kind of this kind of eclectic sort of stuff coming into the house. I remember the going back to I think I said earlier on about I had heard Desire by Dylan, and I didn't really like it. I couldn't make sense of it. It was kind of, that sepia colored album, and I go, what's going on here? Like, the sound was so strange. And I heard that in a friend's house, and that friend babysat my sister. It was her birthday, and my parents wanted to get her a record. And I said, she listens to Bob Dylan. So my dad came home through his friend with The Times They Are Changing. And I remember I said, I'll have a sneak listen to this before it goes out of the house. And putting it on, and literally it was like somebody slapping me around the face. It was like, a great awakening. So after that, I remember purchasing, Another Side of Bob Dylan and Freewheeling and all, getting all of them then, and, going through them and spending hours and hours with them. So that's the kind of first conscious thing, I have of, wanting records and, making sure I got them, and have been collecting his ever since.
Yeah. Tell me this, if we were to look at your record collection, what would be the biggest outlier the one album that doesn't quite fit in with everybody else, but it's important to you?
Probably actually Glenn Miller's Greatest Hits, because I played in this big band thing and so on. I did that type of music and I absolutely love it. And it has a way of calming everything down. You put that music on and it's kind of like a cloak or something. It just smooches around you, and the size of the band, the quality of the musicians in the bands, and the cleverness of the arrangements. I just love it, but it sticks out a bit. It's a big double brown. It's sort of brown like a curtain around it. Big double album. So that I think would probably strike people as a bit odd. But I actually listened to it just recently. If I'm just pottering around, I'll put it on. Or we're sitting outside having a drink in the garden or something. Just put it on and it's fabulous. So that's probably it.
You can't go wrong with String of Pearls.
Oh no, it's just beautiful, isn't it? And Moonlight Serenade and so on. It's just wonderful, And it's the ease of it, the ease of it with such a huge number of musicians, and also it kind of captures an age as well. It has that thing of, that. In fact, I think a couple of the songs on the album have a bit of a 1950s type of a neo 1950s sort of feel, that sort of thing about them. But I think it was a very, very particular time. I know, the 40s and 50s, but the just that whole, I don't know what it is, a richness about that music that I think is just fantastic and does give a sense of comfort, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You like them as well?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So, in fact, a few years back, somebody asked me to name just at random 2 of your favorite bands, and I said ZZ Top and the Glenn Miller Orchestra. And the person's just had this blank look on their face. This, how could both of those be in one collection?
Yeah.
So, but it's like I keep everything alphabetical, chronological in my albums and my CDs. And so I told him, I go, well, you go from Led Zeppelin to Peggy Lee back to back on my CD rack. So that shouldn't really be a surprise for you,
Fantastic.
But so we're talking about albums. Let's get into conviction.
Yeah.
When you write, are you someone who, since lyrics are obviously important to you, are you a lyrics first writer? Are you a music first writer, or is it just it happens as it happens?
Yeah, it's a bit of both, I think. I think if I walk alone, for some reason I write in my head lyrics. I begin to adopt the rhythm of a song that emerges, and it's not something conscious. It's just something that happens and kind of has always happened. But I can, as I said, if I pick up the guitar and I'm trying to practice or whatever, or even trying to learn somebody else's song, I kind of go, oh, that sounds interesting, and then I go off. If I find then a repetitive pattern, and then try to hang something on that. Actually, the phone is fantastic. The iPhone, because while you're walking along, you can say and sing lines into it. Like have tons of stuff in this, and likewise then when you're playing, so I don't forget either the approach I had or maybe some melody lines and so on. So it's a bit of both, but. Yeah, it depends. Like if I'm sitting down with the guitar, it's probably, maybe more towards the music. If I'm up and about and walking around, or in the car, for example, it's probably more the lyric. It's something about, the sort of just having the bit of time and space and something that's a rhythm in your body that gives you the feel of the song.
Well, for me, you'll hear a phrase or a phrase will come to mind, and sometimes that phrase will be kind of will have a melody to it.
Yeah.
And then that can be the impetus for whether it's the chorus or, what have you, where it goes.
Yeah. And if you look at a lot of the, if you read about professional songwriting, in inverted commas, people talk about getting a title and writing to a title, and that title should then be. And I think that's particularly in the country music genre, but you get a lot of that about writing a hit song type idea, that you get this single-minded idea, and you're writing to this, and then people are probably going to their thesaurus or whatever and finding words. I can't do that. Either it comes to me or it doesn't. I don't ever force it, and I don't try to artificially construct it. That doesn't mean I don't work at it, but I don't work at it in that way. I think it was, I can't remember exactly, but my recollection was that it was Bruce Springsteen said he never wrote a song, he only ever rewrote a song. And I think it's that, that idea, you get something. For example, there's a song called Another Day on the album, which is a single out at the moment. And, I was stopped at a traffic light, a girl pulled up beside me, and she was upset. She's driving another car, she was upset. But the thing that also caught my eye was there was a little sort of a little furry giraffe hanging from the rearview mirror. And the two things just kind of stuck in my head. And so I started to write that song, and it was, what's the opening line? But it ends up with a giraffe hanging from her rearview mirror, tears on her face, as she considers, right? And I kept the giraffe there for a long time. And then I thought, no, the giraffe doesn't make any sense, because how can people, it will just seem like a complete anomaly in here. And it took me a long time to actually find Angel, which is now an angel hangs from the rearview mirror. And the angel is a much more kind of a global concept, right, of minding and safety and so on. And I wasn't even consciously thinking that, but that word comes in instead of giraffe. But it started out as a giraffe, and because it was a giraffe, but it was that caught my eye. So yeah, those sorts of things happen, I think, and but you have to. There's something there because it won't go away, but you then have to work it and find, well, what is it that's there that's interesting you, and how can you take it further?
Which track on the album the song, I should say, came to you the quickest?
There's one called Shining, and I literally sat down and wrote it as in lyric and melody in its entirety. And for a long time, I had no idea what it was, but it's a kind of a more, it's very image laden song. It's not a story. It's kind of like has dark side and there's a bright side. And, but it kind of came out more or less as it is. And not obviously the version on the album as in, dressed up and so on, but, the song the feel of that song came out as it is. And that's kind of great, that happens. I mean, you know yourself that can happen, and sometimes it can be just rubbish, and you have to let it go. But the fact that it happens is kind of fascinating in itself. It's happening for a reason, and so you have to kind of sit down and look at it and kick it around a bit and see, what is this, and is it doing something for me? That song always did something for me, even though I wasn't 100% sure, still not really, I suppose, what the hell it's about. But I also then performed it acoustically, and it always worked. People always went, who wrote that song? That's a fantastic song. I said, well, I wrote that song. And that's always a good sign, And so that song kind of came out like that. That was the easiest by far.
Yeah. Well, on the album, the track that to me jumped, and partly because it's the most different from the rest. That's You, Me, and Nobody.
Yeah.
That one's like you're kind of channeling the 1960s Who.
Yeah. It was, and I think it's the shortest song I ever wrote. I think it's about 240, something like that. I'm very proud of that because I tend to write longer songs. And really, that was like, I have no idea where that started, but it ended up being pure wordplay. I really like it. like there's things like, you know, you're bringing me down like a purple pill. I have no idea what a purple pill is, but it sounds great. You know, it's like, I think the idea is that somebody is leaving a relationship, but or they think they're leaving, but they can't, right? There's some sort of ongoing attraction, but that's about the height of it. You know, it doesn't have to be that or anything else, but it's really it's much more aggressive and faster than almost anything I've ever written, except when I was with the band. Maybe there, you know, years ago when I was playing with bands, we would have, you know, some very fast tracks too. But I got a great kick out of it, just the sheer wordplay of it, and for some reason, there's probably actually more words in it than any of the other songs, even though it's the shortest song. But for some reason, it coheres. You know, that it feels to me like a whole song. Even though it's kind of wham bam, thank you, ma'am. It's in there and it's out, and but I think there's strong images in it. There's a fantastic middle age. I love it, you know. And it basically, when we were recording it, the producer said to the guys, he said, "Look, just think garage band, you know, just think you're in a garage and pump it out." And they did, you know, and there's great energy in it as a result, you know.
Yeah. Now the first single was Happy Days.
Yeah.
Tell us about that one.
Yeah, a different sort of song altogether. And I started that song a long time ago. I was in a place called Vilnius, which is the capital of Lithuania. And I was sitting in an old square, and I think you used this word earlier on, observation. A lot of songwriting is literally about just being aware, you know, observing things. And so rather than playing on a phone or doing anything else, I just sat there with my notebook and I looked. And the opening line of the song is, I bend to tie the lace of the right angled woman. And Eastern Europe is an interesting place. You know, it's come out of an interesting history, and there's a clash, if you like, between the younger people who are flying ahead into modernity and the people who are left behind, whose pensions and otherwise would have, you know, their health system, everything else would have depended upon a sort of centrist state. And, you know, there's a lot of people under a lot of hardship. But not to overplay that, you see these older people, and this woman literally was at a right angle with a cane trying to walk up a cobbled street hill. And so that just struck me, and I wrote it down, right angled woman. But there was also then an Orthodox priest with some nuns behind him in wimples, you know, and they were walking across a courtyard, and I kind of took that image. There was a very old church, and, you know, kind of looked a bit decrepit. But on the other hand, you'll have it like a modern store, you know, a 7-Eleven or something, you know, beside. It's just this mix, you know, and, you know, it's changed again since. But at the time when I started to write this song, I just wrote down all of these things I was seeing. And at some point after that, then I started to just sit down and try to make a song of it. And there's a couple of songs that I did that with on the album. The last one, Loving Those Steps, is similar, where I just had a bunch of text. And I had to try to work a song. I knew there was a song there, but I had to work the song in. And that one then, you know, began to progress out of those initial images into other things. And in my head, it has a sort of an environmental leaning in it in terms of our concept of progress, you know. And the happy days, as you know, the days is D-A-Z-E rather than D-A-Y-S. And it's just something about how we're walking blindfolded into things that we shouldn't be walking into, I don't think, in the name of progress. And so that's where that came from. But when I got the Happy Days, and I can't remember exactly how I got that, it really pegged it for me, you know, then that kind of knowing. And I also have it in a sort of a 680, 3/4 type of, you know, thing going on. And the waltz aspect of it, it's not a strict waltz, but the waltz feel of it, to me also then was very appropriate, you know, for the song, that sort of prosody thing between the feel of the music and the lyric in it. It just felt, you know, it was circling on itself and had this sort of dizzying days thing going on. And so that's kind of where that one came out of. And yeah, I really enjoyed writing that song and enjoyed recording it then with the guys. And the fiddle, it was a 4-piece band basically recording the album. And there's a fiddle on that track. It's the only track where there's a sort of an extraneous instrument, but I think it works very well on it.
Yeah. Well, how about To Know You?
To Know You, yeah. That's another sort of wordplay type one. It's like, it has turned into, again in my head, like a form of prayer about love. This thing that we talk about all the time, and it's unknowable. We know it, but we don't know it, and we're all searching for it, and so on. So it was like the other image that comes to my mind is that scene from Hamlet, the play Hamlet, where he holds up the skull, and he's like looking at the skull, and from all of the different angles. So it's kind of like that, that I'm trying to get that sense of, let me think, feel, talk and reveal that all the things that we do as individuals, as people, seeking love, trying to understand love, it's kind of an all-consuming journey for a lot of us, I think. And sometimes we're thinking about it, sometimes we're just feeling it. We're trying to find our way through this thing because we don't really know what it is. It is a minefield, but it is, the thing that we crave and desire. So that's where that came from. And going back to the Glenn Miller reference earlier on, that to me has that sort of swoony 50s thing going on. And I was thinking of, I don't know what's the name of the album, the Cowboy Junkies album. They recorded in a church that has this sort of lovely echoey feel.
Right.
And that's kind of, I was trying to communicate that to the guys as well. That kind of we need this sort of reverential sort of soundscape to the song. So and also I wanted it to feel like it was no effort, that it just kind of flowed and moved along. And I think it does. And unlike, say, some of the other songs, it's very few lyrics in that song. And that's kind of, I like that contrast also. It's more a mood than anything else, trying to create that mood and bring people into it.
Right. Now I have to ask you, on the album cover, there's a young hooligan in a mugshot. Tell us the backstory on that cover of photo.
Yeah. Well, that photo comes from when I was a kid, I think about 11. I toured the east coast of the States with this band, and we did some parade work and we did some concerts, and we were in various states, and we stayed with families, mostly. So we'd meet in the local school gym or something like that, and we'd be allocated to our families, about 40 of us, and we'd head off with our families. But I think this was in Hartford in Connecticut. My family, the guy I stayed with, I think he was a police chief or a police sergeant or police something, and he was part of the American experience at the time. He brought me down to the station, and so he fingerprinted me, put me in a cell, and took a mugshot. And so that mugshot, was sort of it's been around, for a long time. And when I was making the album, I was talking to my sister about it, and she said, look, why don't you use that picture and call the album Conviction? Because you've absolute conviction about this project. And you also then have the sort of ambiguity in the word, which is kind of a nice sort of flavor also. So that's where that came from. And I think it works really well. So I worked with a design guy to kind of, to put it up there and, kind of place it on the album cover and so on. I think he did a really good job, but it was my sister's kind of thinking that kind of Nolan who kind of sold it to me. And sometimes when somebody makes a suggestion like that, particularly for an album, it's your thing and so on, you kind of go, no, I want to do my own thing. But it just made sense to me straight away. I said, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's run with that,
Yeah. Well, I like how in the profile shot you can see you grinning.
Yeah. The dimple gives it away that I'm not in trouble.
Either that, or you're so proud of whatever you did that you're smiling in your mugshot.
Yeah. But yeah, it works, I think,
Yeah. Well, as we're talking about album covers, what to you are some of the most iconic album covers? Like when you think about younger going into the record store,
Yeah.
and you see certain albums, they take you back to like when you saw them there. What would a few of those be?
Well, there was one which was called, if I remember correctly, I think it was called the Tawn, which is an Irish word, and the band was the Horselips, and they had the album cover cut like a squeeze box. So, it was octagonal, I think, and so it was this fabulous thing, that opened out and, had the kind of layers and things in it, like just, fabulous. Of course, Dark Side of the Moon is, kind of iconic, and everybody would talk about that. I love also, for example, the cover of Blonde and Blonde, just that image of Dylan at that particular point in time, I think is just, is really, really fantastic. And then I think probably more modern stuff. I'm trying to think, what else would I be? I suppose that I'm not really as aware anymore because we're gone down to this size or none at all.
Right.
But there are some of the ones that would kind of stick out for me, or the Beatles ones when they're on the sort of, what do they call it, the red and the blue album, where they're on different floors and stuff like that. Those are the sorts of ones that would kind of strike me, straight out. A lot of jazz albums, I really like the actual, just the covers, just the smokiness of them, that sort of gray blue thing that a lot of albums kind of, come across, because it tells you immediately what you're getting into, but they'd be kind of ones that would stick out for me at the moment.
Yeah. Well, you can't go wrong with any of those.
Yeah. And what would be yours?
Man, you know what? It's one of those things to where, at any given time, the ones that I recall most, you mentioned, the red and blue.
Yeah.
Dwayne Eddy's Have Swinging Guitar Will Travel, where he's sitting on the guitar case. The Buddy Holly's Story that has that iconic photo of him. Then you get into, like you say, I remember like going into the record store for the longest time. Jimmy Buffett's Son of a Sailor was always, sitting right up front as you would walk in. So it all depends on like what I'm reflecting back on at that moment that pop out.
Yeah.
So, and I always like the Poco covers that had the horse.
Who's this?
Poco.
No,
and had the horse caricature. So on them. Those were always kind of iconic. So, but all right. Well, tell me this, Tony. Is there anything that we haven't gotten to in regard to Conviction?
No, I think you've covered it. It's been fantastic, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to ramble on and kind of to share some stories. And it's been a really wonderful conversation. So, unless there's more on your side, I think I'm good, and hope your listeners like it and that they reach out and have a listen themselves.
Absolutely. Well, we've had your Facebook and Instagram information scrolling across the screen throughout the show, and we'll have that posted with this. Conviction comes out tomorrow, so folks can go out there, and then it'll be available on all the usual places, I presume.
Absolutely, yeah, be on all of the platforms, and then the actual CD will be available from my own site and other sites also.
All right. Sounds good. Well, on that note, Tony, we'll bring this one to a close. I want to thank everybody for watching. Tony, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Michael.
Everybody have a good night.
This has been Music Night at the Majestic with Michael Boswell. If you enjoyed this edition of Music Night at the Majestic, follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, and at musicnight.net. Music Night at the Majestic is a copyright production of Starliner Media. Any use of the accounts and descriptions of this program, its audio or visual content, without the express written consent of Starliner Media is prohibited. Thank you for joining us this evening. We'll see you next time for Music Night at the Majestic. This is your announcer speaking. Starliner Media.